It's 7 o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. I'd like to invite William and Grayson Jansen to come up to help call the meeting to order. Come on, guys. Got a special job for you. Please come this way. I thought you were this. Okay, so one at a time. Grayson, you come first. You sit on my lap. And William, you stand right here. Okay, and you say, I call this meeting to order. Okay, now you bang the hammer around for it. Thank you. And Grayson, you hit the gong. Take this. Right. Now you can take your seats. So with that, William and Grayson, Assistant Village President, is calling this regular Fox Point meeting to order. It's October 9, 2018. Welcome, everybody. And I'll ask the village treasurer to call the roll.
Trustee Fonstadt?
Here.
Trustee Simchik? Trustee Sumner? Here. Trustee Tirado?
Here.
Trustee Kravitz?
Here.
Trustee Ullman?
Here.
President Frazier?
Here. Persons desiring to be heard, we're at agenda item 2. If anybody wishes to be heard on an item on or off the agenda, this is your time. We have several people who have filled out these speaker cards. You can speak, everybody gets 3 minutes. You can divide your 3 minutes. You can use it all up now, or you can wait until the actual agenda item is called, or you can divide up your time, however you want. Our first speaker is Rob Jansen. Mr. Jansen, please come up to the microphone. And Mr. Wagner, Jansen's attorney. And Mr. Jansen has given me a letter to distribute to these members, which I'll do now. Mr. Wagner.
Thank you. I'm a new resident of Whitefish Bay. I was sent that from Fox Point, and glad to be here. This is my first time on this board. But I'm here on behalf of Ms. Karen Sullivan and the Jansen family. They reside at 7030 and 7031 Belmont. And the issue that's before you later on the agenda is a special assessment issue as a result of a need for a repair of a riser and a lateral that serves there. I'll give you a short history because one of the concerns that my clients have is the process that's happened and the extreme cost that's involved here. And the process starts in April of this year when they received letters from the Director of Public Works saying that the lateral and riser needed to be repaired. It was 22 feet deep, which I think, if you look in the village's records, is probably one of the deepest risers, as a consequence expensive, and that they were failing, and they needed to be repaired, and it was urgent. And then on May 30th, the department sent an email saying that it's so urgent, it's an emergency, and as applicants, they might not be eligible for the MMSD credit. And so that, of course, became a concern, and they needed to call Scott today. It was so urgent. And so at that point, they were being told that the MMSD funding might not be available. Then on June 1st, I got a letter that said that the pipe had been scoped, and it was failing, and the repair must be completed by June 20th, 28 days later. And so they give, the Sullivan household and the Jansen household, which don't know anything about construction, 28 days to repair this on their own, or obviously there's going to be some municipal action. Well, they've never hired contractors like this. They don't know infrastructure, and they're typically pretty much civilians in this world. At this point, it doesn't seem they've indicated, the village is indicating to them that they know how much this cost them. But the reality is they did, and this was information that was not shared with them at that time. Some bids actually had been solicited. One bid was already in hand in the village hall that showed this was going to be a $30,000 project, but this wasn't shared with the Sullivans and the Jansen households. So on their own, Karen and Rob have the pipe scope themselves, figured, boy, I got to do something. I got to figure out what's wrong here. Is this really true? Because it's underground. And what's unusual for homeowners, this is the middle of the street. It's not on their lot line. It's something that is shared, and it's not something that's uniquely theirs. And obviously, without this experience, they get a verbal estimate that's going to cost somewhere between $45,000 and $75,000 based upon the scope and the information. And then on July 17th, they send a letter to the village asking some basic questions about why we're responsible and all this sort of thing. They get a nice long letter, but it does say that this is a shared municipal sewer structure, okay? And they're wondering, why are we individually responsible? Secondly, it's in the middle of the road. Again, it doesn't feel like it's very much theirs. But they're told that the village will impose a special assessment if they don't do something. But they are offered this $5,000 carrot from MMSD that apparently they each would be eligible for. Well, on August 20th, they get another letter from the village told that they must...
Mr. Wagner, you're at 3 minutes. Would you like an extra minute?
I have 2 clients. Would I be able to take advantage of that?
No, but they can speak on their own behalf.
Okay. So I will take another minute, but I appreciate the courtesy. So the issue here is, for them, is that the cost eventually turned out to be much higher. They learned on October 2nd that even though there were 3 bids for $30,000 to $45,000 that they were told about, they agreed to sign an agreement based upon their reliance on the information that they were given. That information turned out to be wrong. They were told that repairs must be done by the 29th. They weren't told that the repairs are less until they were later, and they relied on that for the signing of the agreement. And so now what do we have here? They've been told they're going to the bids are now between $45,000 and $140,000. They are unknown, and they feel that somehow, as consumers of municipal services, they've been pressured. They got misinformation. They also got information that was omitted that should have been shared with them. And what they're actually suggesting, because of the size, the scope, and the amount of this money, they'd like to share this expense with the village as opposed to individually. They now have been offered the $5,000 each, and they'd like to propose that this expense be shared because they were not given the accurate information. They were given deadlines that were false. They were made pressure that sign or lose the MSD funding if they didn't sign the easement agreement that was proper to them. And so as consumers of municipal services, they should have been treated with better respect. They should have gotten better information and felt not like they were being, essentially cornered to sign that agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Our next speaker is Mr. Turnoff, Lawrence Turnoff.
I'd like to defer my comments, if any, till after the report on Indian Creek. That's all right.
Certainly. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on an item on or off the agenda? Hearing none, and we'll hear from Mr. Turnoff when the agenda item is called. We'll move to agenda item 3, committee reports. The plan commission met last week and considered 2 applications. Mr. Fonstadt and I attended. Mr. Fonstadt, would you mind if I took the first one and you take the second one?
You can take one.
Well,
I'll take the second one.
I'll take the first one. All right, the first is an application to buy a limited liability company called Acquisitions LLC to run a consignment store at the current location of Walters Loft. That's at the corner of Port Washington and Bradley. The applicant wants to run a very similar operation to what has been Walters Loft for, I believe, the last 7 or 8 years. The planning commission recommended approval to the village board. Mr. Fonstadt?
Yes, we also, at that same meeting, considered a conditional use permit for the Pantry Food Mart, and they invited to buy the village construction going on there. It turns out that the southern 4 feet of that property is Fox Point. They had gone through all the approvals necessary for the Bayside, came to us to get our blessing. The Planning Commission didn't have any particular issues with the project. It expands the size of the building, but we did ask the applicant to invest in some landscaping on the eastern side of the property along Fort Washington Road, and that they indicated they would do, and would be something that would be presented to the village manager and the village forester this fall, and then would be installed next spring. Since it doesn't make a lot of sense to do it with winter coming on. So with that change, the Planning Commission recommended that the board approve the conditional use permit for open pantries, and that is item 4D on the consent list. The other item is 4C on the agenda.
Any questions by the board members about these two applications? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Bonstadt. We will move to the consent agenda. Before we reach there, I would like to note a typographical correction on item 4H as in Curie. The correct date should be September 1, 2018 through September 2018. Would any member care to remove an item from the consent agenda? Yes, Mr. Carter. Item F. Item F is removed. Any other items to be removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, I move to approve the consent agenda absent item F. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. The consent agenda is approved except item F, which we will pick up at the end of the business. Indian Creek update. Mr. Brandmeier, can you give us an Indian Creek update? And Mr. Turnover, would you like to speak after?
After, please.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I was asked to provide an update regarding the activities along Indian Creek. We've been working with MMSD for the better part of the last 2.5 years regarding sediment that's been built up, and there's some sort of cost structure, and there's a number of moving parts associated with this whole process. Number one, which predates me prior to 2006, MMSD in conjunction with Milwaukee County and the Village of Fox Point constructed a retention basin on the west side of Fort Washington Road and just a little bit north of what is considered Indian Creek on the west side. And that basin was done in conjunction with Milwaukee County because they were redoing Fort Washington Road, otherwise known as County W. And Milwaukee County needed it for stormwater quality purposes, so they were dragged into the agreement because it's a permanent pool basin. If they had not been brought into the agreement, if they didn't need the water quality credits, it would have been a dry basin, and it just would have been a two-party agreement between MMSD and Village of Fox Point. Fast forward a couple of years, when I started in 2006, Village was working with MMSD to undertake improvements to Indian Creek, and that was predominantly removing a concrete lined channel throughout the creek, which is about 3,000 feet long, and then widening it, buying some homes, removing those homes, and creating a dry basin. And so there's a difference between a retention basin where you get water quality credits and a dry basin where you do not get water quality credits. The dry basin for the Village of Fox Point is the one at the northwest corner of Regent and Dean Road where all the homes were removed. Once construction was completed in 2007, MMSD had a 5-year maintenance agreement associated with it. Within a year of construction being completed, my foreman, Mike Krieger, called me out in the field. We went out there and noticed that sediment was starting to build up downstream of two predominant locations, Manor Lane and Seneca. So this was probably in about 2008 when we started working with the district. Here we are 10.5 years later, we're still working with the district. And the problem boiled down to the sediment building up, cattails taking over the creek, and from my perspective, MMSD not really doing what they were supposed to be doing. So we've had negotiations back and forth, and they've continued to ask that we transfer the property, that we go through the real estate transfer because it was supposed to occur within 5 years, or after 5 years of construction. And we've pushed back on that for a number of reasons. Number one, on the retention basin, we keep telling them that you have to have Milwaukee County as part of the agreement because they have maintenance responsibilities associated with the wet basin and dredging of any sediment that builds up because they need water quality. And the village doesn't want to be on the hook. And unfortunately for the district, we've run through probably a half dozen engineers in 9 years. And so once a new engineer is assigned to it, they spend a year getting up to speed, 6 months talking to me, and then they retire. So it's been a long process on that one. On the creek itself, we decided to take it upon ourselves to hire Merrick Landscaping to control the cattail population. We tried a number of things, which of course didn't work. Prescribed burn because it was too wet. But we found that a wick application and a selective herbicide application of the cattails has really helped to control the population and bring the natives back in. But we've continued to work with MMSD because we're concerned about the sediment buildup. So where we're at right now is MMSD may contribute to the village a portion of the costs that we've incurred to date and for the next 3 years. They've got to take that to their commission members and have that approved. And basically what we have if you will, a gentleman's agreement, because I spoke with the executive director about a month and a half ago. There's an agreement that they will kick in half the cost of what we incurred, plus 50% up to, I believe it's $15,000 annually for the next 2 years, to help with the control of the cattail population as well as other invasives, which is something that they should have done. Right now, they're not interested in doing any of the sediment work because a little wrench was thrown into the whole machine when we learned that the DNR is doing a floodplain analysis. And there's a draft floodplain that shows it extends beyond boundaries of what is currently there. So the update is that they don't want to do anything, and that's understandable. They don't want to spend capital dollars on creating or fixing a sediment issue when there might be additional work that has to happen after DNR does this 100-year floodplain analysis. It was completely unknown both to MMSD and to us that the DNR was undertaking this activity, because if some of you recall being on the board for a while, we started doing our own 100-year floodplain and mapping so we could do a LOMAR. There were a lot of residents in the area who wanted to get out of the paying the insurance for being in the floodplain. So we said, let's start this process. And we were darn close to submitting it when we found out that the DNR was doing their own analysis. We got a draft map that shows larger boundaries than what we had ever anticipated. So we drew back from our analysis and said, why do we want to spend any more money, village money, when the DNR is already doing this?
When is this going to finish?
Good question. We've asked that of the DNR, and it all depends on their funding from FEMA. It could be in a year, it could be in 3 years. We don't get anything definitive. They've been working on it for a few years.
Are you still working? Are you still, you haven't finished your?
I just have just a couple more
I'll wait
comments.
until you're done then.
So the district, of course, wants this transfer to be done, the real estate transfer, and there's, again, two separate components. There's the Indian Creek portion, the 3,000 feet, and the pond portion. The pond portion, they've met, in my opinion, all of their obligations. Now it's just waiting for Milwaukee County to get on board with this. And we've told them, once you get Milwaukee County on board and it's part of the agreement, then we can present to the village board for this real estate transfer. In terms of Indian Creek, I said, well, if you're willing to pay for a portion of the costs, up to 50%, we can present it to the board, and then what we grant back to them is a drainage easement. But of course, it's subject to our village attorney looking at it, so the village board approving. I've always made them aware of the fact that it's got to go through those two approval processes. But ultimately, in terms of the sediment, they're willing to work with us, but not do anything at this juncture. From an engineering and purely common sense perspective, it makes sense why you want to throw good money at bad if you have to redo that creek at some point in time in the future. The unfortunate thing is, we don't know. That's my update.
Yeah, couple of questions. You said there's kind of a gentleman's agreement going forward that MMSD would share their costs up to $15,000. Was that 2 or 3 years, did you say? Or was it?
It would be for everything that we've incurred to date
Yes, I understand.
through Merrick, and then for 3 years.
3 years, okay. I
Yep.
didn't know it was 2 or 3. And then you said that the new floodplain analysis that the DNR is doing may end up with designating a larger area as a floodplain or being in the 100-year floodplain. Can you give us an overview of what the implications of that would be if there was a degree?
Because it's draft, I don't think it would be appropriate to share that information because
But like,
it
just
would,
in terms of being a larger area.
it would be a larger area. You could throw residents into pandemonium if you said it was going to attach 100 more properties or 2 more properties. I haven't evaluated how many total properties would be impacted by this. Suffice it to say it's more than what was anticipated when MMSD did the construction back in 2006. Again, I've got the map, but it is a draft map, and I'd like them to finish things up rather than scare people into thinking that, oh my God, now else is going to be in the floodplain. We don't know right now.
And it's until it's done, it's not done.
Correct.
We'll review the calculations, we find stuff sometimes it's wrong, so.
And that's what took so long with our analysis. We found calculations that MMSD had done that were incorrect. And so our engineer was working with theirs and trying to correct the calculations that had been done on the work previously for the 100-year floodplain.
Mr. Crowder, putting the potential expanded floodplain area aside for the moment, just like looking at Indian Creek, that it's not flowing and it's got cattails. What would be your ultimate solution?
Well, quite honestly, I'd like to clean up the sediment downstream of Manor and Seneca.
How would you do that?
It's a dredging activity, but it requires a Chapter 30 permit because it's considered a navigable waterway. And for those of you folks who are out on next door, you saw the post the other day, somebody saw a large carp swimming around. It looked to be about a 24-inch carp swimming in Indian Creek. So it is considered a navigable waterway. You have to get a permit, and quite frankly, it will never flow the way a concrete channel does, because in that 3,000 feet, it only has 9 inches of pitch. Normally, you have 12 inches of pitch every 100 feet. It's a 1% slope. Here at 9 inches and 3,000 feet, it just will unfortunately be wet. Especially this time of the year when you don't have a lot of sunshine, temperatures are cooler, you get these rain events, it's going to remain wet. And it did the last 2 summers, it remained fairly wet in spite of warmer temperatures that we had. So in terms of a flow capacity, or a flow component, it's never going to be what we once saw, where you had a concrete lined channel, and after a rain event 2 days later, the bottom of the concrete is all dry. You're never going to have that again. So my goal is control the invasives, which includes the cattails, and you will always get wind-blown seeds coming in. You get some willows that start to grow. Our staff has gone out there and cut those down, but there are other invasives in there, and I've asked Merrick to give us a proposal to manage that. This year, our costs for managing the cattails was about $5,500. We had $13,000, $14,000 budgeted, so I wanted to get some of those other invasives taken care of as well. I haven't gotten a proposal yet, but that's my ultimate goal. Because right now, everything that I'm seeing personally and professionally, I think the natives that we wanted to establish are starting to establish themselves. By controlling the cattail population, we've allowed more root development for the other plantings. In fact, my foreman and I were out there middle of this summer, and there was a scientist who used to work for Merrick, and she was out there working for somebody else just taking pictures because she was impressed with how well it had transformed from predominant cattail population to now these natives that you can actually enjoy.
If we have another big rainstorm and flood, is that water going to flow?
It will, it does eventually flow because there's 9 inches of pitch, but you're going to have standing water until it dries out in the bottom of the channel. And what we've noticed this year in particular is that what was constructed was this undulating channel throughout. And you saw that demarcation this year for the first time in 8-9 years.
So the continuing treatment of the other invasives is just basically herbicide?
Correct. Or cutting down as we've gone. You cut down and then you treat, because ash, for instance, if you have in ash blown seed come in and start to sprout, those things will pop up sprouts wherever. And so you cut it down and you treat the stump. It could be a little 1-inch stump, but you treat that and then it won't grow roots from there.
Mr. Toroff, you've been very patient.
I'm retired. Patience is my middle name. So let me start with the good part.
Well, first start by saying your name and your address, please.
My name is Lawrence Tarnoff. I reside at 8501 North Point Drive, which is on the northwest intersection with Indian Creek. And I reside today in the floodplain. I'm anxious for the DNR to finish that work. I'm also anxious to see your draft report. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share that, or do I need to go through the exercise of a Freedom of Information Act retrieval?
Okay, so you got to address your comments to us.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I hear you want to the report voluntarily submitted.
Yes.
Anything else?
Yes, I do want to say that in the 3 years that we've resided adjacent to the creek has never looked better. We're very pleased with the work that's been done thus far.
So if I may answer the question,
Please.
I kind of pointed at the attorney because releasing a draft, I believe in law a draft cannot be released, but that's why I'll defer to our village attorney.
Yeah, we can.
We got to investigate that.
We can discuss that at another time with the village attorney, but we do understand what you want and why.
Okay. I would just ask that after you have that discussion, if you've notified me as to your decision.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Brandmeier on his report?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Crowder.
Well, the reason I wanted this on the agenda is, and I'm not an engineer, but Mr. Tarnoff is the first person I've heard that likes how Indian Creek looks. But it doesn't seem like if we have a big rain and intense weather seems to be a new normal for us, that Indian Creek is not going to flow, and then we're going to be facing residents who will ask us, you had 5, 6, 10 years to try to resolve this problem. Now my basement's completely flooded because Indian Creek's not flowing and it reaches its bank. And I think we should address that.
Well, look, may I ask the Director of Public Works a question? I'm not an engineer either, but given enough money, we could make Indian Creek flow. We could grade it so Indian Creek would flow.
We most certainly could, because on the other side of the interstate, west side of I-43, Indian Creek then drops, I believe it's 4 or 5 feet through River Hills to the Milwaukee River. So while it's a very shallow slope within the village of Fox Point, once it hits River Hills, it drops pretty significantly, and there's adequate pitch and velocity on that. Now, in terms of flow and capacity, what I can say, at least empirically, since the basin was, the whole project was completed, the water, the storms that we've had have contained the storm. They have overtopped it on a couple of occasions where they've gone across Indian Creek, but it has not gone into, as far as I know, unless somebody hasn't contacted me, they have not gone into anybody's homes. Has it filled up the creek? You bet it has. And it's flowed right up to the bottom of the bridge decks, if not touching them or darn near encroaching upon the top of the bridge deck. We've had that in the intense storms back in August. You will have that when you get the short duration heavy rainfalls of 2 inches in a 3-hour period. It's just all going to flow and meet at that one location. Because there's not a whole heck of a lot of pitch, then it becomes, I don't want to call it a constriction point, but it kind of comes to a dead stop, if you will, and then flows more gradually, as opposed to having adequate pitch on things. Now, if you had a 1% flow on that, you probably wouldn't have as much water sitting in there. So there are a number of things that could be done and looked at. Do you make it wider? Do you purchase more homes? Right now, as far as I know, I have not received any complaints regarding how it performs from a flow perspective. The biggest complaint has always been all the cattails and the unsightliness of it. And so that's what we've been tackling, because I've felt that it's served its intended purpose of a storm retention area for the 100-year flood. Now, of course, you're going to have these storm events, and you look at this from an engineering perspective, and the new rainfall models and how much rain happens in a period of time, whether it's 6 hours, 12 hours, 24. When you look at all those rain events, it was designed, if I'm not mistaken, for a 1% probability storm. You're going to have events where you might have a 500-year storm, which would be a 0.2% probability storm. So you can get that multiple times a year, but it's a 0.2% probability that it happens. No different than the 100-year storm, which is 1% probability that it'll happen every time it rains. And that's why we have to get away from the moniker of 100-year storm, 500-year storm, 1,000-year storm, because it's really the probability of an event happening at any one rain event.
But as it becomes more and more of a law, with that, the 100-year storm is going to be a 50-year storm, it's going to be a 5-year storm, and pretty soon it just might be an ongoing risk as any creek turns into a law.
Well, and that's why we've looked at the sediment issue. We want to clear that sediment out, but MMSD did commission engineers to do a study and look at how the sediment has impacted the flow in there. And while there may be a moderate impact, moderate is probably not the appropriate term, because there's a buildup downstream of Manor and Seneca. You still have the flow channel that's designed through there, and in terms of the capacity of the basin, it hasn't changed it appreciably. And when I say appreciably, over the entire length, I believe it was 0.02 of a foot, because they did do that analysis. That said, we continue to push for what can we do about the sediment in the basin? How can we get that out of there because of that concern that we have? We don't want to allow it to continue to build up. But by removing the cattail population from the dynamic, you now are eliminating that organic growth where the cattails would fall over, flop over during the winter, decay, die, and build that sediment out. By getting rid of that component, you're reducing the amount of sediment that we build up.
And that's really done by dredging.
Yes. Yep.
So in my simple mind, if MSMD initially triggered the problem, took responsibility for 5 years, and now in 2008 or whatever the time frame was, wanted Fox Point to sue it back, and we pushed back on that. As we sit here fast forward today, MMSD is still responsible for that, are they not?
That's been our position. The manager and I have talked with them at length.
Many times.
Yes.
Still responsible for that, and it's turned into a log, and the solution is dredging. I understand that it will take some time to get, what you call it, Chapter 30.
Chapter 30 permit, yeah, through the DNR.
But, I mean, time is irrelevant when we talk about a municipality. We have time until forever. My suggestion 3 years ago was to apply for the permit, get a cost, order the cost for dredging, and present that to MMSD and say, we got to get going before the next big flood.
And that's certainly something we could do. We didn't do it at that time because we were working with MMC and their engineers and trying to figure out, does the sediment impact the flow performance of the basin? And based on what they shared with me, it doesn't appear that it does at this time. But we did pose the question, what if it continues to build up through time?
But the solution 3 years ago, the first phase, if I remember right, was to cut the tops of the cattails and then to pump in the creek full of herbicide and then clear out some of the debris, everything but dredging. And that didn't work. It didn't work, did it?
Well, I would say that in terms of the sediment component, get the cattails out of there, because one of the activities that we did 2 years ago, we actually, it was like baling hay. We hired Merrick and we said, okay, the controlled burn or prescribed burn isn't working. Herbicide, yeah, it's working, it's killing the cattails. How do we get that debris out of there so we can remove that organic component from there and reduce the sediment buildup when it decays? And so we decided let's really bundle it. And so they pulled it off to the side, they hauled some off-site. We provided our packer and said, throw it in the packer, that's fine, get it out here. We're gonna pay for it one way or another. So we provided some labor in terms of getting it into the packer and hauling it off to a yard waste facility. And I think that more than anything else, by baling the cattails and getting them out of there, we've reduced that organic component.
But if you look at that part of Indian Creek today, it looks no different than it did 3 years ago before that operation.
Well, I'd have to disagree with you with all due respect, because there are areas where you still have cattails, but when we look at aerial photos through the years, there were a lot of cattails that they basically took over the entire thing, including that retention basin at the northwest corner of Region D. Now it's more of the native species. You do still have some cattails, and that's why we continue to hire Merrick to do some additional treatments of that, because you're always going to get that. It is a wet area, as you call it, a bog. You're going to continue to get that, and that's why we need to treat them and get them out of there.
So now we bring in the expanded area that perhaps could involve floodplain areas. But even with the expanded areas, it would seem to me, again, I'm not an engineer, but it would seem to me that we still have to address the basic flow problem, even with an increased area of a floodplain. But the creek still has to flow, it can't turn into a bog.
The flow is imperceptible to the naked eye. If you're down there, you will see ripples. You will see the water flowing. But if you're standing up on top of, if you're standing at Indian Creek and looking down, it doesn't look like it's flowing. Again, that's because there's just 9 inches of pitch in 3,000 feet.
And a million invasive species.
Yes, Mr. Toronto. Then let's try to conclude this.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for reporting. I was under the impression this, again, myself, the Merrick work 3 years ago, was really maintenance. They were doing some temporary maintenance. It wasn't meant to be any kind of work. It seems like there's some interest in taking action here, considering what we're agendaed for. I would encourage that this item, if there is interest, be motion put on a future agenda. So now it seems like we're just questioning what happened here or what.
Right, we're treading water. If it's the sense of the board to actually push this, then we can agenda a discussion about applying for a Chapter 2 permit. And as Mr. Craddock points out, that they make this issue right for presentation to MMSD and see if that is the bridge.
Understand, I'm not going to give it this, understand that applying for a Chapter 30 permit for property you have not accepted yet, it's not a property I'm going to do. And you don't want to accept it. I mean, what I would caution you at this point, I think Mr. Brandmeier's right, the flow is imperceptible. You're never going to, yes, you can make that pitch greater than it is, but there are so many complicating factors with that, as we've discussed many, many times. I think over the 3 years, and I think the gentleman is correct, the perpetual maintenance that has been applied has greatly reduced the cattail population. It does reduce the sedimentation, which does help us improve the flow with only 9 inches of pitch. That's just the reality. But the reality is, there's no way, you've heard me in these many meetings in here, that I would ever recommend to you guys that you all go down that road or accept it from MMSD until we let this process play out, which I know is not what you want to hear. But as your manager, I'm just saying, you know, and I'll be honest with you, I think MMSD was right there ready to do something. Okay, you know, for a while they didn't want to say this, but there was some hesitation on their part to accept responsibility for what was there. My position has been kind of good cop, bad cop, very clear. I just want you to build what you said you're going to build. That's what I told him. And Scott did all the engineering stuff and all the management. And I said, just build what you're supposed to build, because I'm not accepting it, nor do I want to spend taxpayers' money on stuff that you guys are supposed to pay for. That was just me. And then at the last second, DNR kind of came in and said, oh, we're redoing our flows and we're going to relook at the flow plan, which is still being looked at.
Yeah, I think we've had a good exchange of information. But I'm a little uncomfortable that it's going beyond the agenda item, which we just received the report from the Director of Public Works.
Well, we can bring this up again. Thank you for your report. We appreciate it.
You bet.
North Shore Library, 2019-2020 capital and preliminary architectural and engineering study presentation. We have Director Susan Draper Anderson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm the director of the North Shore Library. I'm here tonight just to quickly update you on the progress that the library board has made on planning for the future of the library. I was here about a year ago and requested some capital funds for the preliminary architectural and engineering study. And thanks to our 4 communities, the library board was able to hire HGA to do that study. The study was completed between April and July of this year. And HGA reported that the building is in pretty good shape. The rooftop air handling system was new in 2014 and shouldn't really need to be replaced for 20 to 25 years. The electrical is good. We don't have a sprinkler system. We'll probably have to install one, but the good news is that the water flow or the main supply is there, and so we don't have to manage that. The HGA also provided some design drawings and as part of their study, and I wanted to show you those to you today. They will really help to solve some of our problems at the library. This is the current library entrance, and with the remodel, it will provide a more notable entry, including a service entry just to the right so that we can have deliveries that come right into the circulation area. It will also provide an outdoor space with improved landscaping. And it will provide a light-filled space for an adult living room for quiet reading and conversation. And the very popular study rooms that are used so often will have a better arrangement for study and work sharing, as well as the technology to make that sharing of information possible. It will provide for a community meeting room that can be open when it's not in use, and also a space that can be divided to service 2 smaller meetings. And when this is not in use, it can be open for library use, but it also just gives us more square footage without adding a cost for that. It will also allow for a larger children's area that can hold the entire children's book collection, including the nonfiction books or the information books. And it will provide a family restroom and more space for those early and pre-literacy activities that are so important in learning to read. And it will, really this remodel is meant to refresh a very tired 32-year-old space that has much of the original carpet and fixtures. It will allow for a more flexible space that will move us into the future for library services and reduce staffing costs with more efficient workflows and technology. The library board feels that the remodel of the current library space is the most cost-effective plan to continue offering quality library services to the patrons on the North Shore. The cost of this plan is reflected in the library's capital budget request for 2019 and 2020, and it's in that folder on the right side. The 2019 costs involve a year of architectural and design work, including construction biddings, and the cost of Fox Point is approximately $79,700. 2020 is when the actual construction would take place, and the cost to Fox Point at that point is $1,022,000. The total project cost to Fox Point is $1,101,000. And the total project cost is $4.1 million. And just as a reminder, Fox Point pays 26.35% of the library costs. Now, I know that's a lot of money. When we talk about the value of a library or a place of learning, a place for people to go to learn their entire life, it's really hard to put a value on that. But what I did do was try to give you the value for Fox Point residents. Currently, 61% of Fox Point residents have a library card, and 31% have used that card in the last 2 years. In the last 12 months, Fox Point resident cards were used 54,174 times. And I've got the checkouts up there, and you can see the percentage of Fox Point checkouts. I always tell my staff, Fox Point is really getting the best value. They pay 26.35%, but they're always way over that in usage. They're 33% in 2017. We don't really keep statistics of where our program users come from. We really like to keep that information confidential. We do track it for summer reading, though, so that we can report back to the schools. And 236 Fox Point children participated in the summer reading program, which was 26% of the participation. And I've given you that number before, so is Eric, the $5.3 million of value that the library offered our North Shore patrons in 2017. In 2017, Fox Point residents saved $1,610,580. Each day at the North Shore Library, and this is 352 days of the year, not just the days we're open, 358 people walk through the door. 154 of those are from Fox Point residents that use their card. There are others that don't use their card. 229 items are checked out by Fox Point residents, and Fox Point residents save $4,575.51 on items they borrow rather than purchasing. The library board has spent the last 2 years completing first a building program that involved focus groups, a survey, and many meetings with staff and the board members. They've also just finally completed this preliminary architectural and engineering study in preparation for a full remodel of the North Shore Library space to begin construction in 2020. The library board has asked me to come to Fox Point tonight and ask for your approval to move forward with this project in 2020.
Thank you. Any questions?
Any
from
questions?
the director? Yes, Mr. Truss.
Yeah. Thanks for the report. Can you provide an update on private fundraising, kind of like, do you have goals for that? Where are you at right now? Or is it just starting kind of broad view of private fundraising?
Yeah, we do have a foundation who will be doing private fundraising. They have not set a goal yet. They're waiting for the 4 communities to come forward and approve the project before they really go out and start anything. They have been meeting and planning mailings and ways to promote the drawings that we got from HGA to our general public. So as soon as the 4 communities do approve this project, we hope that the foundation will get going. They'll set their goal and let our communities know where they plan for their funding to go. One other thing to mention, I did go to River Hills last month, and they did approve this, pending everyone else, of course.
One other question. So you're generous enough, it was 14 months ago last summer, that you gave me kind of behind the scenes tour. You pointed out some of the things that need addressing or improving. It seems like.
I can't hear you.
I don't think that's
This isn't working.
No.
Is it working now?
No.
share here with Trustee Holman. So I did that behind the scenes tour with you, and one of the things I think that was, you know, kind of clearly lacking was more of like the ongoing maintenance. You know, I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and because it's one thing that to do the capital costs of a very nice library, it's another thing is when there's minor, even potentially major repairs that need to be done, and we don't, the four combined communities don't have the, or you know, we don't have the infrastructure there, the staffing to really make those repairs and fixes. So I guess the question I have for you is, what's your thought or ideas of how do we kind of address the ongoing maintenance, even with a newly refurbished library, any facility has a maintenance cost to it?
I think part of that is planning for it. I don't like to be too critical, but nothing was done.
What do you mean by nothing was done?
Carpets weren't cleaned for years
Oh,
before I
yeah.
got there. I mean,
Right.
nothing was done. No one asked for funding to do basic maintenance. But as far as a long-term plan, I think that's something that the foundation can be helpful for in trying to set aside some of the funds they raise so that monies could be used in the future for things like that. Especially in the situation we're in now, we need to plan for that rooftop unit in 20 years. You know, and if the foundation can set some money aside, we can do that. But
Right. So this is more like a statement than a question for everyone, but besides the capital costs, is for us aware, if we're going to invest in this, we also, all four communities need to invest in appropriate staffing and maintenance for a facility like this.
well, and I'm hoping that some of the staffing costs will be reduced by the technology we'll be implementing. We'll be moving that community room forward, or not the community room into the middle of the library and moving the circulation area forward, which will mean we can use fewer staff. Right now the setup is so crazy. I mean, we have like 5 people on sometimes, and most libraries, if they have a desk where it should be and the technology it needs, could get by with 2. So it's, you know, I think there are more efficient ways we can work.
Anyone from the audience wish to be heard on this agenda item? No? Other questions? Mr. Bynum?
I was going to say, we're not intended to take any action tonight. But this would be part of our budget deliberations. I just want to say that I have the privilege of being on the library board the last several months and had a more extensive exposure to the remodeling plans, and it's transformative in my opinion. It takes a space that is very tired and somewhat like catacomb in places. It really opens it up and transforms it into a bright, open, very inviting space. So I think that part of it, the staff working with the architects has done their part in putting that together. And the next phase is for the communities to step up to the commitment that's necessary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
We move to item 5C, the end of season pool report. I believe our assistant village manager, Mike Edwards, will give the report.
Everyone has their packet. It's actually in the last page, just on the back, if you guys want to flip to that. And I'm actually going to go through it backwards. Start with the exciting stuff. So I want to start with programming, and then we'll kind of work our way up. Programming has been in pretty steady decline. If you look at dive team's the only consistent one, but it's really not a revenue generator with an average of about 13 people participating. Swim team in 2014 to 2012, we're just going down each year. Again, 2014 is the first year that we actually have any data for the pool. Before that, it was a lot of tally marks, and I think I've mentioned that in the past, but we just can't use it, so 2014 is kind of where we start. Water ballet is down, swim lessons are way down. Again, I don't have an answer for that, I wish I did. Membership is just about the same. If you go up just a little bit, I broke down the membership between residents, non-residents, single. Resident family is actually fairly flat. We have about 170 every year. I don't know if it's the same families, but it is fairly flat. Non-resident family is where we're losing a lot of our revenue. We are down from 180 family residents memberships in 2014 down to 82 this past year. That is quite significant.
Any sense why?
Honestly, I have no idea. On a positive note, we do have the RFQ out through the pool committee. As part of that, they are looking, as part of the study, what does the marketplace look like? Where are people going? What are people paying? So hopefully we'll get a lot of answers on that. But as far as for these numbers, honestly, I don't have any idea. So I don't know where people are going. If you go look at the transfer total, it's about halfway up. I want to make one correction in 2017. So right above where it says $35,000, there's actually a $80,000 transfer from the fund balance. The reason that doesn't show up is we actually made that transfer after the audit. I don't know if that was on purpose, strategic, who knows. Scott's good with money. But that's the only thing. So that one is actually about $115,000 transfer total that year, not $35,000, if anyone was curious. 2018, we budgeted about $107,000 to subsidize the pool. Obviously, the $21,000 that's there right now in the 2018 year to date, that's going to continue to go up. The expenditure total in general, that's going to keep going up. Part of public works salary, my salary, benefits, a lot of DPW guys, that's still getting taken out, so we're still transferring that over. So we won't have an actual number for that until the audit comes out next year, but we're looking at subsidizing about $100,000 this year.
Before you just interrupt,
Yeah.
just so everyone understands, the fund balance that's applied, which is the pool no longer really has a fund balance left, or the general fund transfer is made after the fiscal year is closed and the audit's done, because then all your expenditures are in and you know exactly what the transfer should be. So that's made as a journal entry after the year's over, so that's why that's done that way.
So next year, that will show in here, but year after year, just that previous year won't show in these charts.
Is that 100,000 in addition to the 20,000?
No, it was the 35,000 that's already in their transfer from capital.
No, but I mean for the projection for the.
Our projection
for
is
2008.
Yeah, it's going to be about $100,000
In total.
correct. Yeah, the year-end fund balance, if we want to go through that, we started in 2014 with $255,000, but you can see above that or below that, we actually used $56,000. So in 2013, it's expected to be over $300,000 in that fund. We've been just kind of eating away at that. And as you can see here, at the end of 2017, we had $52,000 left in there. The board did allocate that towards reserve study, pool committee. We have an RFQ coming up that's going to be about $35,000. We had UWM students do some work, so we will eat that up at this point, and we won't have any more on that.
It's also believed, and we don't really have good data, and frankly, it doesn't matter that much, but we talked about this, that the $255,000, $232,000 wasn't probably pool generated revenues that built that up. It was general fund transfers that the village board made over many years that they made, and maybe they didn't spend it all. It was just left there, and they never journal entered it back to the general fund. Again, it doesn't matter much because we committed the last $50-something thousand to the pool study and that sort of stuff. But just so everyone gets a sense that I don't want people thinking that, geez, we made $250,000 at the pool, because we didn't.
No. If you want to go to expenditures here, you can see since 2014, we've actually stayed fairly flat, trying to stay at about $175,000 in general expenditures. So that's not including debt or capital. That number in previous years, 2013, 2012, was about $100,000 over that. So we have been able since 2014 to reduce our expenditures pretty significantly. Most of that was getting new pool managers, the overlapping lifeguard hours. There was no proper management down at the pool, so we were just paying for things we weren't using. Right? So we have gotten that pretty flat. That's about as low as it's going to go. Again, that $140,000 for 2018 year to date will change. Probably be at $180,000 by year's end. So again, fairly flat. Again, this is the revenues. All of our revenue comes from camps, classes, memberships, and daily. That perfectly coincides with what we talked about earlier. Lack of membership, lack of programming. That's our revenue source. And again, I don't have any answers of where people are going.
Can I jump in again?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something that I guess wasn't 100% clear to me until like this year, was that the programmatic activities that we have, even though they drive revenues for us, we lose money. So they receive additional revenues, but for every dollar you see, we actually spend more dollars than the dollar we take in.
Right.
The staffing.
Right. The amount of staffing we need.
Staffing in the code, just the overall order.
Right. Red Cross standards requires that we have a certain amount of lifeguards around the pool, and when we have programs, we need not only those employees, but we need coaches on top of it. So we have 7, 8 lifeguards on staff at all times with programs that really don't bring any revenue. As a side note, I did speak with Miss Cupcake. Her real name is Ashley. She is not 100% that she will come back next year. If you guys do remember, we did struggle to get a vendor in there. Prior to her, we had vending machines, which nobody wants. Actually, I believe there was 60 people behind me that year. Ashley did just have a baby. She does not make a fortune by any means, not even close down in the pool. I am really hoping to have her back. She's quite an asset for the pool. So at this point, we're not sure what we're going to do about that. We have been talking a lot about these revenues and watching the non-residents memberships decline, family memberships. And we're not seeing an influx of single non-resident family memberships. And I'm pretty sure that's because we allow non-residents since 2016, I believe, to have unlimited daily passes. So at some point, they're going to do the math and say, how many times can I go to the pool for that $360? We as a staff have been talking about possibly changing that. But again, we don't want to steer anyone away from the pool, especially if we're in the midst of possibly creating. We want to keep our members. So it's kind of a balance of doing that. Talked to Marty a few times about that and trying to come up with some solutions, but we may learn a lot, again, in that study that the pool committee is doing. That's about it. If anyone has any questions.
Any questions for the assistant manager? Yes, Mr. Brown.
Well, just looking at that, at some point we're probably going to be faced with a decision whether to fund a new pool somewhere or not. And looking at these numbers here, I would suggest that we find out more empirically why people have left. We're going to try to face the residents and say we need a couple $2 million for the pool. Well, we have no idea why memberships didn't renew last year. That doesn't fly. Wouldn't fly with me. Now, when someone signs up for membership, we have their name and address and phone number, probably, presumably. Give me some of those that didn't renew that. I'll call them and ask them why didn't they come back this year? I mean, it's information that we can have. I think it's information that any reasonable person would want if they're going to commit $1 million to it.
Mr. Flavo, I had some good comments and questions that we had there. I do want to point out some of the positives, and that was a really nice report that Mike put together. So he even highlighted some of the positives again. I think some of this is more of a little philosophical discussion we're going to have, a deeper dive into this over the course of the process of whether we build a new pool or not. And that's really the if this is a business model. Business model is built right now off of non-resident memberships. If you take a look at if our core audience is Fox Point residents, Fox Point residents are actually stable on family memberships, if not slightly increasing from 2015, and that's for the full family. And then even for resident singles, single memberships is actually slightly increasing as well. So just a point of the core audience of who we're serving in the pool is going to need to be addressed, because if it is Fox Point residents, right now that is actually the most stable part of the pool membership or community.
Mr. Constantine?
Where would I look for the daily revenues? You indicated that,
Our daily's actually doing very well, but again, it's actually up
just
top.
under that point of sale?
Yep, point of sale.
Okay, good, so, I was thinking that was.
Yeah, so this,
Candy and ice cream bar, but it's not.
and this year we hit almost $25,000, but again, we kind of need to say, had some of those that family memberships, where would our revenue be? And it's very hard to do that. That is exciting to see that keeps coming. We have been busy. This was a really good summer. We've got a lot of compliments. I know this wasn't all the information that good news everyone was looking for. But we did. We get a lot of compliments, and a lot of people come and do our programs because we do have a wonderful staff down there, and they know the kids, and they treat them well, and they see them year after year. They build that relationship, and then it is year after year. It sounds very, very nice to hear from residents.
Mr. Constantine?
We've experimented over the years with different kinds of pricing models, reduced memberships, hoping that more people would come in and then they would become committed to the pool experience. And to sort of dovetail with what Trustee Abbott was saying, I don't know what the overall trends are in municipal pools like ours. I don't know, because I think staff's done a good job in marketing the pool this year, reaching out to surrounding communities, making the pool experience itself very positive, and that's reflected by your comments. But it doesn't. It's just pointing that it's not reflected in increased membership.
I know when we originally decided to change it from non-residents in the past had to be family memberships. There was no single memberships. There was no daily pass. There was nothing. This idea was originally temporary, and the idea was to get people to come in, realize how great our facility was, and switch back, hoping that they would continue to be members. But there's a balance with that. It's very, very difficult to just then take that away. So it's something that staff has to discuss. We have to come up with a new model or keep the same model for the next pool season.
Mr. Bodger and then Mr. Constantine.
First I want to say, very good report. Very good. And I'm in favor of the pool. So I'm trying to look for ways to make this, kind of moving down, because somewhere down the line, we're going to have to approve some financing. I look at these numbers, and I see ways where it can work, but we have huge information voids. And I think information is where it's at in order to make this work. That's what I see. And I don't know whether individual memberships or required non-residents to buy a yearly pass. I don't know if that works. You can't tell from this whether that can work or not. I don't know why the non-residents have not renewed. Families grow up and they would get away from the pool and new members come in. But I think information is the key to make these numbers work. And if we can make these numbers work even on a projection, it's going to be easier to fund the pools. Mr. Bodger?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Marty and Christine is also here, and the committee is. I think it'll be important once we get whoever is selected to do the pool study, You know, and as part of the qualifications for that, there was a significant financial component as that as well. Obviously, the committee didn't want people just to draw a separate pool with the information back in. So there is some financial work that they're going to have to do as Super Homes to give us some indication as to whether or not this is financially viable for the village. You know, I'm not going to lie to you. You're going to have a significant philosophical discussion balanced out with significant financial reality as to what kind of dollars you want to commit on behalf of the taxpayer, not only now, but this is a 50-year purchase. And so, you know, it's going to take some thought. It's going to take some limits. I'm glad Marty is here having this analysis done, because we at some point, you know, really need to have that kind of grown-up discussion about real money, because it's real money. And you know, the thing about a pool is that you have a substantial amount of what I would call fixed costs, and we have to get to the point where our variable costs are controllable to the extent that we can cover as much of the fixed costs as we can. And so that gap, I mean, every pool in the state loses money. The one in Tosa that is largely privately financed, the word is not doing so. The newness is rubbed off it a little bit, and that's okay. It's okay. I love that. The pool is a great community gathering spot. It's got some great amenities. Kids go there and all that sort of stuff. But you guys are also likely to make financial choices, and so that's going to be the deal. But I think your idea about the financial void is largely going to be filled by Marty and his committee other study. So hopefully that'll be one of the.
Yeah,
I also think that, I mean, financially viable is certainly a really good end goal, but financially palatable might be.
That's a good word.
Might be more realistic.
Might be more realistic.
Yes,
I'd like to thank Mr. Pedersen for an excellent report and a well-managed pool season, too. You and your staff did a really good job this season, as you have in the past.
That was great.
And could you please communicate to Ms. Cupcake my disappointment that that's not her real name?
I will ever change it.
We all know it is.
All right, we're back to the item removed from the consent agenda. I would accept, this is a bid of Globe Contractors, Inc. in the amount of $42,300 for the repair rehabilitation of the sanitary sewer riser and lateral pipes, the 70-30 and 70-31 for Belmont.
All right, yeah, so the comments we heard earlier in the meeting, combined with, I had received some information from the homeowners on Belmont Land Sherman House did too earlier, it's been the summer of this year. So it wasn't really necessarily the contract, the low bid contract being awarded to contractors. It was really the part on after the work is complete, the property owners have the opportunity to pay the balance, split it equally. That kind of addresses this here in this letter that we received from the two homeowners. So, layperson question here. Yes, maybe some background and explanation would be good for me, because you're right. I get a letter like this and someone says, you are responsible for something that's in the middle of the road that seems like it's a public utility issue, and now you're going to need to split a cost of $40,000 with a neighbor and a half, and major shocks, that's right, just about every homeowner, unless you have unlimited resources.
Would Mr. Bradmeyer like to come forward and give us some background on this item, and then we can take some questions?
So Mr. Pedersen is graciously going and giving me a few markers. I'll draw on the whiteboard, give you an idea of public versus private infrastructure and the differences. And I'm just focusing right now on the sanitary sewer because that's the issue at hand.
Mr. Bradmeyer, could you carry the microphone?
I'd be happy to. So the issue at hand, and I'll get out of the way with the drawing, but every municipality has, in the metro area, has sanitary sewer mains sanitary sewer mains are located, generally speaking, anywhere from 15 to 25 feet below the ground. In Fox Point, we've got deeper mains, as it is in the case with the Sullivans and the Jansons. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but they're not the only ones where the sanitary sewer main is so deep. So you have two ways of approaching the sanitary sewer main and the connections to that main from the private laterals. If the main is not particularly deep, you'll have a sanitary sewer main, and then you have what's called a Y connection. And this is where the lateral, the private lateral, comes in. So if you were to look at it from top down, what you're looking at is a connection like this. So their water will flow in, and the water in the sanitary sewer continues to flow. That's generally, 12 to 15 feet deep, generally speaking. In other areas of the village, and again, they're not alone. We have, latest count, over 300 situations where you have risers, 200 locations in the village. Over 100 of them have combined riser pipes with laterals similar to the Jansons and Sullivans. So in that particular case with the riser pipe, you have the sanitary sewer main, and then you have a riser pipe because it's so deep. And that riser pipe, in the case of the Jansons and the Sullivans, is roughly 7.5 feet deep. And that can vary in size from, say, 3 feet to 8, 10 feet in depth. And then off that riser pipe, you've got the lateral connection. In their case, they share one riser pipe. So the difference between the two is on the left-hand side of the drawing. It'll be hard for the minutes to reflect this, that's why I'm trying to describe it. On the left-hand side of the drawing, you have a direct Y connection, and you'll have individual laterals tying in at different locations throughout the stretch of sanitary sewer main. On the right-hand side condition with the riser pipe, like I mentioned, there are over 100 properties that have a combined riser pipe where both of them tie into that one riser pipe. You'd have to go back, in some cases, to the 1930s to figure out why the contractors did what they did. I can't really answer why they would combine two laterals into one riser other than, from a practical perspective and thinking about it, likely a cost savings measure. Regardless of the situation, property owners are responsible for the maintenance of their sanitary sewer lateral to the point of connection with the sanitary sewer main. That has always been the village's policy. That's in our code that says they have to get a permit to tie into our sanitary sewer main. So we've always maintained it is not the village's responsibility. Now, while the sanitary sewer main is out in the road, that's logical because we have our mains running through the road. We need to be able to access the manholes. We do our sewer cleaning on a regular basis. We televise our sanitary sewer mains. We take a look at our manholes. We inspect those on a regular basis. So we, as a village, are responsible for the public infrastructure. We are not responsible for the private infrastructure. So regardless of the situation, whether you have a riser or don't have a riser, it is the property owner's responsibility to take care of that problem. We've had this in many cases where people's laterals and risers have failed and they have had to fix those.
What did you circle where the problem is exactly in this situation?
In their particular situation, the upper part. Right now it resides in the upper part of the riser and into the lateral. The video that we have clearly shows that there's a chunk of the lateral that has presumably flowed away into the sanitary sewer main because it's not there. You can see exposed stone. And the evidence of that is with the sinkhole above this particular location. And what really brought this to light was the fact that roughly in late March, early April, my foreman became aware of a sinkhole forming in this particular location. So we go through the machinations where you say, okay, is this our sanitary sewer main? Is it a storm sewer? Because we have that over there as well. Some of you may recall we had a sinkhole form off of Green Tree in Santa Monica around MMSD's manhole. So we did all sorts of televising with that as well. We crawled into our storm sewer, we looked at that, tried to figure out what's going on. MMSD was looking at what's happening. We do the same thing in this particular case. So we do an investigation, we televise not only our main, but the sanitary sewer lateral. We shot up the riser pipe and as far as we could in the lateral and discovered that our main is lined and is in good condition. So it's the upper part of the riser and the lateral connection that is failing. And unfortunate for the property owners, it's failing in the middle of the road where all the connections are made.
Is the riser a private property element or a public property element?
Private property element. We have had other situations in the past, and I did some research. I looked back historically on the riser pipe issues. Back in 2008, 2 years after I started, we had a situation. Now in that particular case as well, we do have some anomalies, if you will, where our sanitary sewer mains and water mains do reside in backyards. But that's in the Old Town of Milwaukee area. We found this out from a gentleman who had to have his riser repaired. That happened in the Old Town of Milwaukee area because that was platted to have alleys, based on my conversation with him. And 10 years ago, he was about 85 years old. He had lived there his entire adult life since getting married. He said, nope, this was all platted for alleys. So he had these sewer mains and water mains put in rear yards. But then when Fox Point connects the town of Milwaukee, they did away with the whole alley concept, but didn't do away with the infrastructure that resided in the backyards. There are easements that are there, but in that particular case, there were 11 risers and laterals that had to be repaired in 2008. There was one on Belmont to the northeast of 7030 and 7031 that was done about 10 years ago. It was right at the corner of Belmont and Barnett. There were two right across the street here at 7150 and 7203, shared riser pipes similar to the Jansons and Sullivans. And then there was one at 229 Bergen, done about 3 years ago. In each case, the property owner has been fully responsible not only for the lateral repair, but for the riser repair. It's always been our policy and code.
Mr. Bradmeyer, the property owners point out that the preliminary quote for this work was $33,000, and it's now gone up through the bidding process to a low of $42,300. Could you explain why?
Yes and no. I can explain why we have different prices, but I can't explain exactly why it happened. What I can tell you is this. We were working with the property owners. We gave them a rough idea of costs when we met with them in mid-May, early mid-May. Didn't have a true idea, but we were able to share with them the costs that we had experienced and seen on prior projects, particularly the one across the street where it was about $20,000 and the one up on Bergen also about $20,000. We said, could it be $20,000, could it be $30,000, could it be $40,000? We don't know. Yours is deeper than these others, so could the price go up? It could most certainly go up. And that was a comment that I shared with them in our first meeting. But what happens with this process is we're working on the side because it is their requirement to do it, but if they aren't going to do it, we have to start to get our ducks in a row and figure out how we're going to get it done, and especially charge the residents. In this particular case, we solicited quotes. Each of the quotes were over the $25,000 threshold for public bidding. One was about $30,000, another was $33,000, and one was about $44,000. Each of them exceeded, obviously, the $25,000 threshold. And because they exceeded the threshold, we have to publicly bid the work. Fast forward to August, we sent a letter to the property owners. As their attorney mentioned, we did work with MMSD. As I mentioned in my earlier presentation, not only did I discuss Indian Creek with the executive director of MMSD, I also talked to him about this particular case. As a property owner myself, I'd be shell shocked with that kind of price. So I worked with them. MMSD does not normally cover what's considered emergency repairs. My comment to the executive director was, is there any way we can get this done and get them funding under our policy? He talked to their director of the PPIA program, Private Property Infiltration and Inflow. I got an email saying, yep, we'll work with you. So then I developed a work plan, and I sent them a letter and saying, giving them a number of options. They could contract separately for the work, and that was sent about August 20th. They could contract separately, but have to follow all the processes and get 3 quotes and still be eligible for the money, but they'd have to pay for it up front by themselves. They could choose not to do the work, and then we would have to force the hand and do it. Or alternatively, we could bid the work out, but there are perils associated with the public bidding. We don't know where the price is going to come out. And that's what happened in this particular case. While the quotes ranged from $30,000 to $44,000, the low bid in this particular case was $42,300, if memory serves me correctly. The other 3 bids that we received were in the 80s to fix the upper part. Now, we also asked and we required the contractors to provide a mandatory supplemental price. And that supplemental price was to fix this portion right here. And the reason we asked that in the bid is we didn't want any surprises out in the field. We wanted that price right away, in case they opened up the excavation and realized that the lateral was bad or it slipped into the sanitary sewer main. Anything could happen with a pipe that's 70 to 80 years old. So we wanted to provide ourselves with better standing, if you will, in terms of the price. So the price to fix the whole lateral down to this point, including the riser, is $67,000. Now, the unfortunate circumstance is I don't know at this point in time today whether it's going to be the $42,000 at this point or if it's going to be the $67,000. What it does include is replacement of the lateral beyond the road. It's about 12 to 15 feet of pipe on each side of the riser connection, replacement of the upper part of the riser, backfilling the trench, putting in asphalt, and then landscape restoration. It is not an inexpensive task, and it's unfortunate that this happened. But this will not be the first one that happened. We've got others as evidence that have occurred in the village, and we'll have more that will come in years to come.
Other questions? Mr. Carter?
I don't know if this is your purview, but is that something that can be identified on the home inspection report before one buys a house?
Quite possibly, because residents can televise their own laterals. I have televised my own lateral. And I did that even before I started with the Village of Fox Point, because I started getting roots in my lateral and I wanted to know what the condition was. So every resident can undertake that if they so desire.
Mr. Bonstein?
Yeah, the only issue before us tonight is whether or not to approve the bid of $42,300. There are a lot of other issues that are connected with this. And I guess I would make an observation.
Can you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
Make an observation, and then I would ask a question. The observation is that the $42,300 with the $5,000 each from MMSD reduces the cost to the homeowner by $10,000, the 2 homeowners. So that's in the ballpark of the $33,000 number that you had been talking about. That's just an observation. The question I have is, which I've just lost.
Come back.
I'll come back. Okay, Mr. Cron.
Yeah, based on the past history of other instances where this has occurred, do you have the dollar amounts of those items?
Well, like I said, the one across the street where you had the combined riser, That was roughly $18,000 or $19,000. The one on Bergen was about 20, 21 perhaps. And then the ones on Navajo and Seneca, I'd go back in our archive files and dig up that and figure out how much it cost. And in each of those cases, those property owners were specially assessed. The ones on Navajo and Seneca predated the PPII policy, so they were on the hook for whatever cost was there without the benefit of MMSD funding. Where the ones on Bergen and Yates, they had the benefit of getting the MMSD funding.
Mr. Potts. Okay, another anecdotal observation. When I bought my property 16 years ago, I got the pleasure of replacing over 100 feet of sanitary lateral for over $10,000. So, anyway, my question is, there are sinkholes forming, problem still exists. What is the urgency of dealing with this now? And also, I guess, looking at the bids, putting it out for bid, we don't select the low bidder here. It looks like, given that the other three bids are twice as much, it looks like there's a risk of, if you have to go to rebid, it might not be this low.
There's always that risk, yes, because one
So
contractor,
your there, yeah.
the one contractor will look at it and say, I left a whole lot of money on the table. The difference between the $42,000 bid and the $80,000 bid, 80 plus. So they're looking at it and saying, okay, can I come more in line? And then the other contractors are also looking at it conversely and saying, should I bring my price down a little bit? But you have some sort of equalization happening. You also have coming into play the fact that you are later in the year, contractors still are fairly busy with construction, and it could reflect the fact that they are now busy and will continue to be busy. Is it possible we could bid this out in early January? Yes, but we don't know what's going to happen. The second sinkhole has formed. It has damaged a portion of the neighbor's driveway at work approach, maybe 1 or 2 square feet. Not a lot, but a second sinkhole has formed. We do have a barrel sitting over the main sinkhole right here, and we've filled that one in with cold patch, I think 3, 4, maybe 5 times, probably 4 times. So we've continued to fill it in with cold patch because it continues to settle. We had to do the other one adjacent off on the shoulder of the road once or twice. So there is, when you look at the risk, what's the risk? As I told the Jansens and the Sullivans, I don't know, I'm not clairvoyant, but we do know that it's failed, and the sinkhole continues to settle. So from a practical perspective, you want to get this taken care of rather than just letting it be. Because at some point in time, could it fail to the point where it blocks their lateral or it collapses down into the main and creates problems upstream? These are things, I'm providing to you things that could happen. Doesn't necessarily mean that they will happen, it's things that could happen.
Mr. Crown.
Well, okay, so the sinkhole is formed because there's a break in the pipe and gravel's coming through and that makes its way to the top and starts. So it could actually fill in and sewage may not flow.
It's quite possible, yes.
So that would be reasonably critical.
And that's a similar thing that happened at the one on Bergen. We saw what was happening. We were doing our normal sanitary sewer cleaning in the early to midwinter time frame. We started in January, go through March or so. And they're cleaning these pipes up on Bergen, and a downstream manhole discovered probably had 3 or 4 5-gallon buckets worth of stone. We didn't know where it was coming from. Had no idea. Ran a camera through there, and it was clean. We could see nothing. Now we used Wayfish Bay's kitty truck. It's a little bit less sophisticated, if you will, than other kitty trucks that can shoot up the lateral. But this one at least allowed us to go down the main and figure out what was going on. The fortunate thing in that particular case is the camera was being pulled back to the upstream manhole. Debris from that particular lateral fell literally right on top of it. And we knew where it was and we could figure out the location and pinpoint it, so we knew what the problem was. And we got somebody else out there and they were able to pan up and see what was going on, and we knew right then that we had a problem with that particular riser and liner.
Would anybody from the public wish to be heard on this?
Yes, a little related, in River Hills.
Hold on, please step up to the microphone and state your name and address.
Kurt Blazner, Calumet Road in River Hills. We had in River Hills through MMSD, I believe, they did camera searches and relining up to 50 feet from the sewer. That was an option over here or not, but 50 feet doesn't go very far. But it would handle a lot of cases, something to explore. You could talk to Kurt.
To address it, we do sanitary sewer lateral lining, but unfortunately in this particular case, it doesn't appear as though lining would be an option because of the condition of the lateral.
Yes.
Yep.
It just sounded like you guys didn't have that option.
Mr. Jansen, would you like to?
I'd like Roy to speak, and then I'd like to add to that.
We can't yield time to one another.
Can we share time?
No, you cannot share time. You are
Okay,
welcome
then I
to.
guess Roy will have to speak. I would,
Oh, you have to step up to the microphone.
I would like you to speak, but,
I don't think you understand. You have to speak.
okay, you won't let me give my motion, okay?
Your
But-
opinion is already spoken.
I'm not prepared to speak. All I can say is, obviously the expense is, it seems like much larger than anyone has ever paid. That's what I've heard, what I think I've heard. We worked, the $33,000 quote was given to us mid-August. They've had that since June. We've asked for it. It was never given to us. I don't know what else to say.
Mr. Toronto.
A question for the attorney, Mr. Wagner.
Sure.
At the beginning of your statements, you had proposed a compromise, I believe. Could you state that for us again, just so I'm clear as to what that is?
Yeah, I think one of the issues for Jansen Sullivan is that they felt like they were a little bait and switch here. There was bidding information that the village obtained in May and June that they didn't disclose. When they were told that MNSD wasn't available because it was an emergency, they felt like they were now okay, so fix it now quickly, or you're going to have to do it all on your own. And then when they were presented with the easement agreement, essentially agreeing to be cooperative because it was a shock to them and they were trying to get information so they could make a decision, they said, well, they did get the bids. The village had bids, and I have them right here, that were in their file in May and June that weren't shared until 2 months later, 2.5 months later. And the number that was given to them was $33,000. Now that was from Gold to do this work. And so when they did the math, you do 33,000, you take off 10, you've got 23, you divide it by 2, and it's 11,500. Not fun, but workable. Now, the reason that we made the proposal that we did is that it doesn't seem like it should be the business practice of the village to demand that you do it, tell you you can't get the MMSD funding unless you sign an agreement, and then told the cost is going to be $33,000, and then send it out for bid, and then be told that you're paying for all of this. And one of the big scares, because I do construction law and I represent sewer contractors, is this whole thing may be failing. Not because it's the shared area, but this could be losing its underpinning. And whose fault is that? That's a municipal shared multiple sewer that when examined in, under surgery, determines this whole thing is sinking. And nothing was televised in scope. So the proposal for a shared responsibility was for the lack of prompt notice, complete information, shared information. And so rather than getting in sort of, some sort of debate, they have always said, okay, it's a big burden, but let's be honest and open about it. And they felt that they were, and they didn't get the information until they were essentially pressured to sign that agreement.
I'll let Mr. Brandmeier.
Can we state what the proposal compromise is?
Yes, yes.
Can we state
Mr.
what is the
Brandmeier,
compromise?
50 words or less, what's the proposal?
The proposal was they would split the cost, okay, and be able to take the $10,000 and deploy it to their 50%.
Split the cost, 10,000 off of
Their share.
Globe. 10,000 and split that to the village and homes.
Correct. But they could take the 10,000 and apply to their.
Right. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Mr. Brandmeier, and I'll let Mr. Botcher talk too.
I'd rather not get into a he said, she said, but the reality is the quotes that were solicited on our part were done because if they didn't move forward with the work, and there was resistance on their part all along to do the work, contrary to what Mr. Wagner says. We have adequate correspondence from them where it was indicated to us that they didn't feel it was their responsibility in the first place, and we were working through the whole process of who was responsible, and we were answering a lot of questions for them in that regard. So we continued to work through that process. On the other hand, I'm trying to get quotes thinking, okay, if you're not going to do the work and we have to force the work, I've got these quotes. When they first asked for the quotes, we provided it to them promptly. We told them we had it. We said, you're more than welcome to copies of it. We had that, but that was our quotes to do the work. And quite frankly, we would have had to publicly bid it anyway. The quotes wouldn't have mattered. We have to publicly bid anything over $25,000. We could not sign a contract for $30,000 or $33,000. We just could not do that. We had to publicly bid the work. And so that's what's going on in this particular case. As it relates to a cost share, I gave you the data. We have over 300 risers. Over 100 of them shared riser pipes, or 200 locations, over 200 locations with risers, 100 of them shared, so we've got about 300 properties with riser pipes. We walk down the slippery slope. If we're going to share that cost for one property owner, we're going to have to do that with everybody else. And that's a board decision. If the board chooses to do that, that's fine, but then rationally you'd have to make that offer to others as well.
Mr. Botcher, do you want to add to that?
No, I think what you stated was accurate. And for my edification, the getting the quotations was simply, for me personally as a manager, a determination as to whether or not we could have to apply for the public bidding law because of the estimated amount. And so obviously it was. They communicated to us that we did have the public do it, and that's what its value was.
I'm going to take several more questions, but I just want to say that we're going to be faced with a choice here. Someone can make a motion, and we can debate it. A motion could be to postpone this to the next meeting if you want more information or to think about this further. But I think one of the two will happen quickly. Mr. Bennett.
Well, if the work is done and it's determined that this is a problem, then does the village cost share, does the village live share now come into play, or is that still the homeowner's expense?
If our sanitary sewer main is a problem, then obviously that's our cost. But as I mentioned earlier, our sanitary sewer main is lined through there. So we've already made rehabilitation efforts for that section.
Okay, what about the, say, the backfill that might have accumulated in here that we have to remove somehow?
That is taken care of. If stone falls down into the pipe through the riser, through the lateral, and into our sanitary sewer main, we've got a sewer jetter truck. We jet that down to the downstream manhole. Guy goes down in there, fills up a 5-gallon bucket, and then they hoist it up and out and dispose of it.
That sounds like a job I want.
Fine space.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, I just want to, I guess, clarification again. The only thing we have on the agenda is the approval of the, or acceptance of the bid. I guess I would move that we accept the bid.
I'll second. All right, so let's discuss that. Accepting the bid for 42-3, which, as Mr. Brandmeier points out, goes to the laterals connecting to the riser. It doesn't go to the repairs below the intersection
down to the lateral owned by the village.
To the main, correct.
To the main. Right, Mr. Johnson. I see the village attorney arranging his papers here, and as he has in the past, that indicates he wants to say something.
Yes, please.
Well, I guess the only thing I want to say is if you accept this bid and you do this work, what that means is that the village is going to pay. If the property owners want to apply for this MMSD funding and thereby agree that they're going to pay for it, that's one thing. That's something they could do. If they don't do that, we could take up a special assessment resolution. I believe Scott had mentioned we would do that. If we go through the special assessment, they will not get the MMSD funding. It will be assessed if you grant it, if you agree to assess it. If they there may be a middle ground where they voluntarily agree to be assessed, and then they can maybe also get the MMSD funding. But so my point is, until something else happens, if you approve this this project, this is village money that's going to pay for the project. We will then go back and the next step and talk about how we're going to make sure that cost is borne by the property owners.
So I have a question.
Hold on, Mr. Johnson.
You know, I want to be clear on one point. I understood you to say that if we accept this bid, then they would not, the property owners would not have access to the $10,000 from MMSD.
No, that's not correct. I didn't mean to say that. What I meant is they have an ability voluntarily to apply for that, as I understand it, for the MMSD funding. As part of that application process, they will have to agree to accept this cost. That's just part of how that works.
And if I could interrupt on that basis, we didn't proceed with the bidding until we got the forms. So they've already signed the necessary forms. And they alluded to that.
MMSD forms?
Correct. We've gotten the application form, we've gotten the temporary construction easement, waiver of special assessments, and waiver of potential condemnation rates. So we've gotten all the necessary forms that will require of all property owners when we proceed with a project of this nature. So that's already in place. The big concern right here, as I understand it and everything I've listened to, is the cost differential between the $30,000 or the $33,000 and the $42,300. That's the issue that's at heart here. And so as I look at it, we are subject, and it really boils down to the perils of public bidding. And that's a problem that you have with the public bidding statute. As I noted in correspondence to Mr. Jansen and Mrs. Sullivan, contact the legislator, because I've been working with state legislators to change that threshold. And there was a proposal, Senate Bill 236, that was on the books and then not voted upon, to change it from $25,000 all the way up to $100,000, then it was dropped down to $75,000, then $50,000, and finally it was just let to go by the wayside. If it had been increased and adopted into law at $50,000, we wouldn't be here today. I would have taken that $30,000 proposal, I would have gotten the money from MMSD, and we would have done with this issue, and we would work with the property owners. Unfortunately, we have to work within the laws that we have right now.
Mr. Crowder.
Well, I was going to ask whether if we approve this, that the MMSD funding would go away.
They're getting the MMSD funding. By working through the village, they have two options to do this. They could either separately contract with somebody, and as they alluded to, they received verbal quotations of $45,000 to $75,000. And the quotes that we received and the bids that we received are where they are at. But whether they sought to do the work or we publicly bid the work, they'd still be eligible for the money. There's different reporting requirements and how it's handled. If they were to contract for the work, they're paying for everything up front. On the other side, on the flip side of the equation, with us publicly bidding it and receiving the forms, we're able to specially assess them over a period of 3 years like we have with other PPII properties and owners that have done this work. So I looked at this and we're trying to soften the blow. That's why I worked with the executive director of MMSD to get the funding for them, even though it wouldn't normally apply.
So the funding's going to happen.
The funding will happen whether they separately contract or we continue with this public bidding?
Yeah, this is a difficult situation. This is a really expensive project. It could be even much more expensive, just depending on what happens. And in isolation, sharing the cost of the property owner makes sense. The problem from a policy perspective is we have too many of these around the village, and we could be looking at really bad policy by adopting what feels fair to us in this case. So that's what makes it really hard. Plus, as you point out, the perils of the public bidding process, where we got two separate bids from the same work, for the same work from the same contractor that was $10,000 different, and we have no control over that. That's just how it shook out, and it's unfortunate. Mr. Funstead?
Yeah, and I want to go back to what we have, the decision we have to make, and that is whether we accept the bid. I didn't hear anything from the property owner about whether or not they think we should accept the bid. Seems to me it's a real gamble to not accept the bid, given the other three bids that came in at twice as much. And I think it would be, I think it's prudent and appropriate for us to accept the bid. Because if we don't, we may be losing opportunity. I think there's a good risk that we're not going to see that number as low as that again. Mr. Carter.
Or the homeowner is facing the risk of increased costs. I agree. In either way, the critical nature of this, and that it's a low bid, and that we put up a rebid, anything can happen. The issue of whether there's some help in paying for it is secondary, and we have the luxury of time to work that out if there's anything to work out there. But I think we need to accept this bid and keep going on.
Anything further?
Yeah, can I ask a question of the attorney?
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Could you step up to the microphone?
Just based on your comments, I just want to be clear. I understand now that a waiver of special assessment was signed by your client. Is that not true? Is that true?
It was based upon information that was given to them and information that was withheld from them.
Well, are you saying that the village can rely on that waiver or not rely on that waiver?
The Jansens and the Sullivans will need to make a decision as to whether they can test the validity.
So that decision has not been made?
Correct.
So the village, how about the amount of the bid? What's your client's position on the amount of the bid?
At the time that they were presented the opportunity to sign the waiver agreement and the easement agreement, it was based upon late information that the village had had for 2.5 months.
And I've heard that, but the amount now is $43,000, and should the village enter that contract or not?
Their concern is that the bid is between $42,000 and $67,000.
So should the village enter the contract or not?
That's a decision of the trustees. The policy issue that I presented was that the village's activities...
But your clients have signed a waiver saying that they're going to accept this cost. Should the village sign this agreement, understanding that your clients have signed that waiver to accept this cost?
They agreed to accept the cost based upon the information that the village gave them at the time.
I don't have any further questions, but I do want to caution the board that this is not going to be resolved as to the acceptance of the costs. And I also think that it would probably violate the MMC's policy if they are not going to accept these costs. I don't believe the MMC will contribute to the cost.
If I may, I'd just like to read a paragraph that I wrote, and I tend to keep pretty detailed correspondence. This is dated Wednesday, October 3rd at 1:49 p.m. in response to an email from Mr. Jansen, and he was frustrated over the cost because I had submitted to him the bids that we received and the cost that you have in front of you. And I noted to him, I completely understand your frustration over the cost of performing the work. These are the perils of the public bidding statute. State law dictates that if the municipality is performing work, it is required to bid projects that are over $25,000 in cost. However, and this is key to everything, because they keep saying that I never apprised them of any of this. But I went back through and I looked at my email message. And I note in this paragraph, however, as I've explained in previous messages, there's always been the prospect of having to repair the entire riser pipe. Please refer to my May 30th, 2018 email, which I attached on that date, and that the cost of the work was likely to change due to the village having to comply with the state bidding statutes. Please refer to my August 28th, 2018 email, which I also attached. So I kept them apprised throughout of what was going on, because I understand, as a property owner myself, again, this is a cost that is a lot. It just is a lot. But I wanted to make it clear to them in my correspondence that there is the risk with public bidding, that it could change. And these were the things that were going on. So I kept that information because I thought it was important, and I shared that with them throughout this process.
So could they have just jumped on that $30,000 bid outside of the village and got the work done?
It's possible that they could have contacted that contractor and worked with them. I had mentioned to them previously that we had these quotes and who we had them from, and if they wanted to go with them, but they had to contract with people. Unfortunately, contrary to what they've said, there was resistance to do the work in the first place until we got to this point. And that's the unfortunate circumstance here. Like I said when I first came up to the podium, I really don't want to get into a he said, she said. I had adequate correspondence to show that we have been working with these property owners diligently to try and resolve the cost issues. As you can see from what they've noted, if they had to hire somebody separately, it ranged between $45,000 and $75,000. I think the village has done its due diligence and has worked very hard to try and save them money on this, as we have with all property owners with this PPII policy.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. The question before the body is to accept the bid as reflected in item F. If there's no further discussion, I think we're ready for a vote. By show of hands, all those in favor of accepting the bid? Opposed? The motion carries. Future agenda items. The board will act on any trustee request to place additional matters on the upcoming agenda without discussion. Anyone wish to place a matter on the upcoming agenda? Hearing none, we move to announcements. The farmers market will be open for the last time of the season this Saturday. We invite everybody out for apple cider, and we want to thank all the Jim and Meredith Charity again for their hard work there in making the farmers market go, and all the staff and volunteers that they've organized for that. Really good job. There is a buckthorn weed out posted by Frankie Dr. Park this Saturday between 9 and 12. Spread the word and bring your gloves and buckthorn removers. The ICC, the Intergovernmental Cooperation Council meeting, was postponed. Our hosting of the meeting was postponed yesterday due to a press conference that was called instead to highlight the dark store right legislation. We will now be hosting the ICC meeting November 12, 2018 at 1 p.m. I believe that's firm, so you are all invited. Mr. Fonstad?
Yes, two items. On September 29th, at the request of the president, village president, that is, I attended a presentation by the Preserve Our Parks group at the Milwaukee Yacht Club, where they made a strong case for finding funds to rehabilitate and maintain our parks. They also introduced a website which I can recommend to anyone who's interested in getting outside and doing anything recreationally. It's called www.awealthofnature, all one word, .org. And what that is it's information on all park resources in the Milwaukee, actually southeastern Wisconsin, searchable by the activity that you're interested in, whether it be hiking or biking or kayaking or whatever. And it is a very well done resource. But the big problem that they were talking about is that the perennial and I would say structural problem of municipalities in southeastern Wisconsin not having resources to support park infrastructure and frankly the other cultural amenities we have. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you read an article. It's in Sunday's Milwaukee Journal, which by the Public Forum, Public Policy Forum, which goes into depth on this, and it's something that's a serious problem, not only for parks, but for zoo and museums and transit, and I say libraries. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to report on is that the Tree Commission met on September 24th, and we were looking at a problem that was brought to us by the Department of Public Works, having to do with ash trees, dead and dying ash trees on private property, and specifically what they're noticing recently is that some contractors are leaving large amounts of waste, what's classified as yard waste, which is really logs and branches and things from removing ash trees from private property. And we looked at several of our ordinances that deal with removing dead and diseased trees and picking up yard waste and fees for yard waste, and came up with some recommendations which will come before the village board to give the Department of Public Works the tools it needs to address this problem. Most specifically, the ability to, if someone leaves a pile of tree waste by the road and it's too large for the village to handle, village needs the ability to hire a contractor to do that work and charge that back to the property owner. The property owner hasn't required his contractor to remove the waste. What's going to happen is that we've done a very good job as a village addressing ash trees and public lands, but as more and more trees die on private property, there's going to be just a flood of ash tree waste that's going to have to be dealt with. It's going to overwhelm the DPW unless we have a mechanism in place to allow the DPW to hire contractors to do that work. So that was the principal thing we talked about. We also talked about removal of ash trees in Eden Creek Woods. An RFP is being prepared. I don't know if it's done yet, but that is something that we'll be looking at as part of the budget process too. I do want to let you know that the RFP not only addresses removal of trees, but replanting trees of a variety of species to reestablish the woods.
Thank you. Ms. Sumner? Trustee Tirado?
We had the full committee report earlier tonight. For the RFQ that we sent out for taking the next step, we did get 4 proposals back. Mayor Globey selected 3 of the 4 to be personally interviewed before the committee, and that interview process is going to take place next week, Monday, and it's 8 a.m. in this room, so if anyone's interested, you're and we're hoping from there that one of the companies, engineering companies, will rise to the top and will recommend that one, company to this board for approval on an expenditure amount. That's it.
Mr. Crowder?
Bring your fishing nets in Indian Creek and grab some of that glow-in-the-dark salmon, or is it the regular clutch part of the waterfall fishermen get wind of it on that particular ones?
Mr. Ullman?
No announcements.
Mr. Bodger?
No announcements.
Very well. We move to agenda item 8, closed session. For the purposes of people watching this later, I will read what we're going into closed session about. It is anticipated the village board will convene into closed session for the following reasons. A, pursuant to state statute section 19.851G, to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body, that's us, with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved related to potential litigation involving removal of trees at 8025 North Beach Drive. Participating in this portion of the closed session will be the village attorney, the village board, the village manager, public works director, and village clerk treasurer. B, pursuant to state statutes 19.851C, to consider compensation of any public employee over which the village board has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. More specifically, we discuss active negotiations between the Village of Fox Point and the Fox Point Professional Policemen's Association. Participating in this portion of the closed session will be the village board, the village manager, and the village clerk treasurer. This is a roll call vote. I'll ask the village clerk treasurer to call the roll. Aye is in favor of going into closed session. No is against.
Trustee Fonstadt?
Aye.
Trustee Simchich? Trustee Sumner? Aye. Trustee Toretto? Trustee Kravitz?
Aye.
Trustee Ullman?
Aye.
Trustee Toretto?
Aye.
President Frazier?
Aye. Motion passes. We're in closed session.
Did you have the door closed?